In my last two videos, I discussed what The Dark Knight meant to me at a time, and I talked about the basic plot and behind the scenes, and would recommend watching my previous videos before progressing. On that note, let's continue. Now, since we have gone through the movie review, it is time to start looking at the themes of the film and its hidden message. Some of these ideas were already presented in the previous video, plus additional film reviews that have already been made by other channels. In this part, I will be discussing the works of Friedrich Nietzsche and the influence he had on the movie's message, along with the cultural fears and relevancy of terrorism within the early 21st century, and other historical facts included. Most of you have probably already seen the film and could possibly be aware of the content that I will be describing within this video. But in the case that you are not, I would possibly suggest viewing the film first before continuing, but would also throw out there that this commentary can add to the initial experience, in which I would recommend staying. With that being said, let's get started. When addressing the hidden themes of The Dark Knight, it is important to look at the time that it was released and the historical implications that are alluded to. The Dark Knight is often referred to as the first post-9/11 film noir, which tackles the subject of terrorism, counteraction in fighting extremists, and the ongoing wars in the Middle East. Directors like Sam Mendes have referred to this movie as inspiration for their cinema, with the Joker influencing the creation of the villain De Silva in the 2012 James Bond film Skyfall. Mendes saw the connections of The Dark Knight and the growing fears of terrorism in reaction to the September 11th attacks, and called the film a game changer. On that fateful day, hijackers had taken control of 4 East Coast planes, with targets including the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and the White House, with the 4th crashing in a field in southern Pennsylvania. That was counteracted by heroic passengers trapped on the plane who sacrificed their lives. Of the members of the Sunni Muslim radical extremist organization, 15 of the 19 hijackers were of Saudi origins, which killed nearly 3,000 people. After September 11th, fear of plane hijackings, makeshift weapons, and explosives were burned in the minds of the Western consciousness, and the growing threat of Al-Qaeda and their leader, Osama bin Laden, were an issue for national security for the US government, which issued a war in Afghanistan following the events that took place that year. You can see how this has shaped the film, with the Joker to represent the unpredictable, raging, pessimistic views of terrorists like Al-Qaeda, and even such individual cases as Ted Kaczynski, known to most as the Unabomber. The Joker comes out of nowhere and immediately starts recruiting the socially misrepresented and the weakest individuals of society to do his will, in the promise of reward for their actions. You can see how the Joker functions as a catalyst, in the same way a cult leader would operate, with the promise of miracles for exchange for their servitude. 45 days after the attacks of 9/11, in the name of national security, under the George W. Bush administration, the Patriot Act was passed through Congress, which its purpose was to use cellular communications data in order to track and prevent terrorist attacks going forward. This would allow the FBI to gain access to obtain personal information without a judge's approval, which resulted in 192,000 cases of national security letters being issued by the FBI between the years 2003 and 2006, which resulted in only one terror-related conviction. You can tell that Bruce Wayne's sonar communications technology used throughout the film is a direct reference to the Patriot Act and George Bush's fight against terrorism. Batman first uses the technology to track down Lau in Hong Kong in order to extradite him to the Gotham Police Department, and it is also used in finding the Joker in order to stop his evil plan at the end of the film. Unfortunately, however, I don't know if the film is using this to expose the invasive measures enacted by the Bush administration, or using this film to argue the use of this act in the name of national security. The fact that at the end of the film, Batman provides the option for the supercomputer to be destroyed after Lucius punches in the password seems to imply that the threat has been absolved. So would the use of this intrusive program. This would be a false depiction of what events after 9/11 have shown us, with many of the policies of the Patriot Act still in effect as of the time of making this video, and would not assume that these policies are going away anytime soon. It is apparent that George Bush, in his war against terrorism, mirrors Bruce Wayne in his exact conflict. There are multiple connections to make with the 43rd President of the United States, considering that they are both parts of the same club.
Charity. All are worthy. Now you can say that again.
And that is Bruce Wayne's grandfather, Mrs. Cooper?
His great-grandfather.
I understand he was tapped for Skull and Bones.
Tapped for it? Sir, he founded Skull and Bones.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us? Not much, because it's a secret. You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go
I'm
wild.
sure they are. I don't know.
For more information on that, I feel a BuzzFeed video describing the secret Yale fraternity provides a baseline understanding of the organization and its members. Bush, like Batman, had been viewed publicly as an oppressor and intimidator, and had drawn much criticism for how he handled the September 11th attacks, and the abuses of civil liberties that he took in order to defend America's borders both near and far. Voices like Glenn Beck and Andrew Klavan made this connection with Batman and Bush on Beck's CNN show back in 2008, describing criticisms of Bush as an attack on conservatism. Something to also consider in making this review is the connection to ancient Rome, as described in the dinner scene with Bruce, Rachel, Harvey, and the Moscow ballerina. The conversation is about how Batman is like Caesar, in this case suggesting Julius, who was a Roman emperor who professed to be a god and who was ultimately betrayed by his comrades for what they believed to be for the good of the Republic. Dent admires his aim for public service, and the comparison is made with him and the ancient dictator, along with a comparison with the Caped Crusader. Dent's main point when discussing the role of the despot is that you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain, which can be said for many political and even religious leaders, and mirrored in the Latin Roman philosophy and symbol of the memento mori, which is personified by a skull and bones that means remember you are mortal, or in other translations, remember you must die. The Birth of Tragedy is the first novel by Friedrich Nietzsche and establishes many of the ideas that he carries throughout his works. In this book, we are introduced to two different forces within the world of nature and the world of the artist. These two different forces are the Apollonian and the Dionysian. In other words, chaos and order. The Apollonian receives their inspirations from their dreams, to which Nietzsche sees as the most real world there is, and the myths of Homer are the realization of this idea. They were inspired by beauty and sculpture, and in their myths Apollo was the founder of the Olympics, and their celebrations of strength and progress. The other side of this duality is the Dionysian, which is represented most accurately through alcoholism, sexual depravity, intoxications, and violence. Within Greek history, the festival of Dionysus that took place around the winter solstice was a time of excess, pleasure, and cruelty. There were within the cult of Dionysus those who had practiced ritualistic mass orgies and ended the ceremonies with sacrifices and the consumption of bloodied flesh. The two forces are in conflict with each other, and when one seems to appear, the other is vanquished and conquered. This happens until, after some time, when the dominant force has emerged victorious, the other force is omitted from the abyss and repeats the cycle again. According to Nietzsche, Apollo, the god of truth, prophecy, healing, and the sun, is the veil of society that gives us an idea or image of what we should be: hopeful, inspiring, profound, and sophisticated. Nietzsche also sees, however, that we are not living according to our true nature when we live in the restrictiveness of the Apollonian, and that this provides a front for who we really are. Nietzsche saw the follower of Dionysus, the god of insanity, ritual madness, and theater, as the most accurate representation of humanity, which is to be fully embraced. That the social fabrics are illusions, and that through the destructive force of the Dionysian, we are liberated and free to engage in the practices of our own individual wants, becoming like gods, who, according to Nietzsche, we can be our own songwriters instead of dancing to the Apollonian song. Nietzsche felt that through Apollo, we live in illusions and dreams. Through Dionysus, however, we are submerged into individuation, euphoria, and carnal pleasures. Friedrich Nietzsche is a nihilist, existentialist, and perspectivist, and criticizes religion and its role in the world, and that the enforcement of these ideas is holding back society from its true potential. Nietzsche also makes direct comparisons with the myth of Prometheus and his gift of fire against the will of the gods, and the serpent in Genesis, and his temptation of Adam and Eve in order to open their eyes to see the world as God doesn't want them to. This is also to say that Nietzsche was a moral relativist that saw traditional morality to be something that is overcome and values to be rewritten. As far as my own commentary on his beliefs, I will be saving these views for my final installment, but I wanted to assure the viewer that this idea carries throughout the plot of the movie as well. The Dark Knight is best described as an adaptation of the book and presents the idea of opposites in its fullest realization of Nietzsche's idea ever presented to film. At the beginning of the movie, and through themes carried throughout the last movie as well, the establishment of order within Gotham is the central struggle for Bruce Wayne, Commissioner Gordon, and Rachel Dawes. In this film, the strongest representation of the Apollonian is neither of the three, but actually the new district attorney, whose handsome, blonde image is that of a bold, charismatic leader who dares to fight against the scum of Gotham's underbelly and stands for the side of authority in a city that has been without hope for so long. It becomes apparent to the viewer that the side of the Joker is obviously the side of chaos, where the Clown Prince of Crime's main motives may not seem as specific as the other characters, but that is because he represents the being that emerges from within order. Batman represents the institutional powers that lead dictatorships and authoritarian principalities, and the Joker is the fanatical cry of the unrepresented and the anarchy of the mob. According to Nietzsche, this is the reason for civil unrest, societal disintegration, totalitarianism, and civic oppression. People like Nietzsche see this as a constant struggle of chaos out of order and order out of chaos. As you can see, however, although the Joker seems to be the best candidate for the embodiment of all chaos, the emergence of the real Dionysian comes through the fallen hero of Harvey Dent. Nietzsche's description of the struggle within the natural forces of chaos and order is that the emergence of the Dionysian is only made once the Apollonian is in its destruction, a form of rebirth or resurrection. It isn't until Batman kills Two-Face at the end of the film that the Batman once again inverts reality and takes the fallen hero and exalts him above as the shining example he was meant to be. Batman sets himself below as the evil entity for all of the corruptions of Dent, casting himself into darkness and taking on damnation for the redemption of Gotham. When Commissioner Gordon and Batman decide to prompt up the symbol of Dent, the Apollonian, they are making a reference to Platonic ideas espoused by philosophers like Socrates, that even though the truth is not to be seen, the idea of perfection keeps the forces of the world in balance. Nietzsche has often criticized the idea of Socrates, and this book is no exception, and that the lie of the Apollonian progress causes nature to be in disunity. It was my intention in this video to discuss the works of Friedrich Nietzsche and the Apollonian and Dionysian duality. I also aimed to provide as much historical context when looking at the film in relation to terrorism within the 21st century, and both of these ideas will be continued and expanded on in the next segments. From here on, I feel it important to expose you to an interpretation that has been made with other YouTube channels and my own reading and research that provides a context in symbolism, art, spiritualism, and religion. I do feel obligated in telling you, the audience, that these next sections made me feel uncomfortable exploring these ideas, but will use as much context provided in order to assure you that this is not something I am misinterpreting. I want to express that as an artist, and when using art to tell a story, visual motifs and patterns are key, especially when accompanied by philosophy and beliefs. The Batman comics and films are full of these ideas and patterns. And going forward, I would encourage you to think about what is being presented.